All right. Well, welcome to Daniel chapter 3. We're going to be doing a little bit of a review here. So let's see what we've got in the past sessions that we've ran into. The question came up, why Daniel? Why are we looking at Daniel? What makes him so important? You're going to find that our Bible tells us that Daniel gives us the most complete history of the Gentiles in advance of any other book. Especially some of these amazing passages that pinpoint certain things that are happening in the future for Daniel, in the past for us, and also in the future for us in some cases. In Daniel chapter 1, we saw that there was the deportation of Daniel to Babylon. Everything that was involved in that, how old he was, the guys, what was going on, what food they had told him that they wanted him to eat. And how he said, let me try doing this, and that way you can see. And following God's plan rather than man's plan made him look better physically. They took notice of it. Good witness, right? So the second chapter of Daniel, we start getting into the career of Nebuchadnezzar. He's just taken over after his father. He's a great general by his own rights, but he's having to figure out what exactly is the court that he's inherited. What is it? Are these guys loyal? Are they genuine? What's about it? So they find out that he's going to be giving them a test. So he has that multi-medaled statue in a dream, and he doesn't tell anybody. He says, you're going to tell me the dream, and you're going to interpret it, or I'm going to cut you into pieces. And so he started that, and Daniel and the boys spoke up and said, hey, wait a minute, give us a shot at it. It really gives you an idea of how confident that Daniel was in bringing this problem to God immediately without even talking to the other guys, and then coming to them and say, this is what we're doing, let's have a prayer meeting here. So really showed us a lot about what was going on with Daniel and his relationship, as well as the situation with Nebuchadnezzar and how he was testing his guys. So here we are as we start getting up to Daniel chapter 3, and we're starting to see a little bit of that the rival's revenge. Remember in 2, he put him in charge of everything. He said, you're going to be in charge of all this stuff here in Babylon. Well, that didn't sit too well with those guys that were born Babylonians. This is a couple of Jewish guys that came up and showed him up, so they're not too happy about that. Now, as you're looking at this chapter 3, you're going to find that most of the commentators are going to say that it's about 20 years from the time of chapter 2. Could be as little as 18, could be as much as 23, but they're saying 20 years. So you're going to see right here that if we looked at this in chronological order and took these chapters, the first chapter was the Babylonian captivity of Daniel. This is when he was deported. It's about 606 BC. As we move a little closer, that second chapter, it was only just a few years that had transpired since all this happened. So Daniel now, he's not 17, now he's 20, 21 years old, something like that. So as we see this move on, we're at 602 BC when that dream of the statue came. Now the third chapter that we're going to go over tonight has this golden image we're going to take a look at. By the time we get there, we're putting this between 587 to 579 BC. Like I said, around 20 years. If you notice in the timeline of things that was happening, Jerusalem's third siege had occurred. See, we had gone through the people that were Jewish leaders, the kings that were there, Zedekiah, as they'd moved through the kings, where Nebuchadnezzar said, I'm going to put you in as a vassal king. You're the king under me. As long as you're doing what I want you to do, we're fine. But none of this rebellion. And they rebelled. And he came down, got rid of the king, put another king in his place, and said, listen. And of course the guy says, no problem, absolutely. And then they rebel again because the false prophets that were down there were saying, oh, we're not supposed to have anything go wrong. We're supposed to be having everything perfect in our lives. Well, that's not quite the case when you're not walking in God's will, is it? When you're not walking in God's will, where they hadn't honored that sabbatical Sabbath, he says, y'all owe me 70 Sabbaths, and I'll be taking them now. So this is where we're at. So those false prophets were saying, hey, we need to rise up. Jeremiah and Ezekiel, see, we got Jeremiah's in Jerusalem and Ezekiel's up in Babylon, and they're both writing the same thing to Jerusalem, and they're saying, stop, don't do this. This situation has been ordained by God because we've been out of joint. We need to get back in line. So they did it anyway. So the third siege came, and he flattens it. This is when that temple was destroyed. Solomon's beautiful temple leveled right to the ground. So this is where we're at. This kind of gives you an idea here. This golden image is coming right around that same time that he had to go put down that revolt from Jerusalem. And then we'll see as we go in the future. I put these in chronological order. In order, the next one would be Nebuchadnezzar's pride. We'll go over that next week. But in order, if you were reading this chronologically, we would take the seventh one next. And it's the vision of the four beasts. And then the ram and the he-goat would be chapter 8. And then we would read chapter 5, Babylon falling to the Persians. And then we would read the vision of the 70 weeks. And then 6 would be the lion's den, and then 10 through 12 we'd close. So if we were reading in chronological order, that's how we'd read it. Now, we're not going to do that, but that gives you an idea how some flashback things are going to be happening here. Now, a lot can happen in 20 years. You know, it's been 20 years since they really got thought of. Well, they really saved some lives down there, you know, coming up with that dream and not letting those guys get killed. Daniel and his 3 compadres here, they're about 37 years old, roughly. 37, 38 years old. Nebuchadnezzar has thought about nothing but that dream, wouldn't it? You? I mean, that'd be just a life-altering kind of a dream. And he's been thinking about that dream, and he's also remembering how it ended. I mean, you saw, oh man, I'm the head of gold, that's terrific. But yeah, there was an end to the head of gold that went on to silver. So now he's thinking, well, when is that? He didn't say when. He didn't say you're going to have about 3 weeks. You know, he kind of said, hey, this is what's going to happen. So now he's thinking, I wonder when that's going to happen. So now he's looking at every revolt as though it might be the end of that head of gold. There were some cuneiform tablets that were found in the area of Babylon. Now they're in the British Museum. It tells of a revolt in Babylon in 586 BC. Not a coincidence, right? This revolt may have been the one that sets the stage for the entire wide-scale reaffirmation and kind of swearing in allegiance from everybody to Nebuchadnezzar. He's kind of just saying, let's all make sure y'all are still worshiping me as the king here, right? We're not getting ready to go to the silver. So this is kind of where he's headed with this. So as you start reading through this, you can almost feel that there's tension building. Daniel, remember, he got placed in charge of the Magi when God had given him that interpretation in that dream in chapter 2. So if you look at this, a 17-year-old outsider gets brought in as a captive, no less, to Babylon. And then a test had been given of all the yes men from his father's court, and they couldn't even follow through with it. But yet, here's this guy who shows up when they failed, and now they are listening to a mere boy teach them about this God that is, they're moving through his beliefs. They're moving through, he tells them about Jehovah. He tells them about all these great things that this one God, monotheistic, one God, not many gods. And while they're looking at these stories that he's telling them, they're just getting more and more infuriated because it's not how they grew up. It's not how they were raised. It's not how they were put into power. So basically, they're getting kind of pushed out of line here. And if you think about it, almost sounds like the Pharisees, doesn't it? All of a sudden, they had this whole power structure worked out, but yet when these guys, this one man comes moving in, all of a sudden, everything they believed, all their power is getting yanked out from underneath them. So they needed to have him dead, like the Pharisees needed to have Jesus dead, right? So this whole chapter that we're going to look at, this event that's coming up came about because of pride. It was Nebuchadnezzar's pride. It was the wise men's pride. It was Satan's pride. And it was the faithfulness of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So, all right. As we get into this, being that it's all about faith, we need to start taking a grasp on this. What's this message coming from? I mean, if all Scripture is for doctrine, reproof, and correction, what is this going to do for us? How is this going to bring us closer to our Savior? Something the Holy Spirit gave me was that the devil tempts us to destroy our faith. That's the whole purpose of that. But God tests us to develop our faith. You know, He puts some weight on the bar so that, yeah, I can lift that, you know, and you're growing and you're getting stronger in your faith and you can lift more as time goes on. Because faith that is not tested is faith that can't be trusted. You can tell me all about your faith, but until you've gone through the fire and said, I got through the fire, I can say, where's your faith? You don't have any faith till I see that there's something that you've gone through. There's some testing that you've been through. False faith, like just telling people that they have faith, it withers in times of trial. True faith takes deeper roots and grows them and really starts making them take off. And that's what brings glory to God. Now, this story is in our Bible to shine the light on us so that we can see what kind of faith it is that we have and kind of show us, would you be able to stand up to this test? You know, what kind of faith do you have? Are you just telling us that you got faith, or are you actually showing us that you got faith? So put yourself in this boat as we go moving along in here and see who exactly is going to be the one that lines up more faith-wise with these guys, okay? Now, Peter shows us that our trials in life are comparable to the fiery trials of these young Hebrew men, and we will overcome them exactly the same way they did, by our faith. First verse is 1 Peter 1:7, and it says that the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to praise and honor and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ. That one I find odd because he's saying more precious than gold, and we're going to find that the statue here is gold, and the faith was more valuable than that. 1 Peter 4:12 is the next one. Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you. See, we have to understand that when these things come out of nowhere, that we don't start freaking out, oh my gosh, why is this happening? Why is this happening? I'm supposed to be a Christian. It's not strange. It's normal. The testing of your faith produces patience. That's why the Word tells you that. All right, so let's dive in here. Daniel chapter 3, verse 1 says, Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its width was 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. See, Daniel had told that king that he was the head of gold. And it's possible that the king's pride wasn't satisfied with just being that head of gold. He wanted his whole kingdom to be symbolized by this entire image that was gold. Not just the head. I want the whole thing. I don't ever want there to be an end. So remember in that chapter 2 when it had come about and he told him the dream and he told him the interpretation, he was so astounded and so amazed. Oh my gosh, you actually knew that. And he said, truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of lords, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret. That was in Daniel 2:47. So he's so amazed about what had happened that he knew Daniel was serving a living God. So now that he said that and we've moved on 20 years, he's changing his tune a little bit. Now he wants to change what God had said. See, he had pride of what God had given him. Remember in chapter 2 it says, you, O king, God put all these things under you. So he told him God put you in power, but yet his pride started to rise up about something he didn't even get himself. God gave it to him. And you're starting to see this little shift in this king that we're talking about. He remembered the dream well, probably his whole life, because this dream was a defining point in this king's life. And the points in the dream that he dwelled on were that he was only the head, and that head would end and a silver kingdom was going to be coming. And that's all he thought about. Almost makes me think a little bit about Satan. Romans 11:25 says that the Gentiles, that fullness of the Gentiles will be complete. And when it is, that's when the eyes of the Jews will be opened. That's when the blindness will be taken away. That's when the last Gentile accepts Christ. And that's when we're going home. Well, you don't think Satan already knows that word? but he doesn't know when that last Gentile is. So he's constantly saying, was that them? Was that them? Was that them? Is that the last one? Or is that the one that accepted Christ right there? Is that the last one? And every time he thinks that, he's wondering, oh man, what's going to happen? That's what Nebuchadnezzar's doing. When is this going to end? I was told it was going to end, but when? So this pride that he had, it started to bring paranoia to his kingdom. Real fear and concern about the end of it. He doesn't want it to end. He wanted to make sure that his people were loyal and that there was no more rebellions in line. So this statue here, as we look at that first verse, it says all gold. Now obviously we know it wasn't solid gold. It was covered in gold. You can look up Isaiah 40:19. You can look up 41:7. You can look up Jeremiah 10:3. Not solid, obviously, because you couldn't have manipulated it. When we go over the size of this thing, being that it was 60 by 6 cubits. 6 cubits, 9 feet. 60 cubits, 90 feet. Imagine something that's not barely 9 feet wide, yet it is 90 feet tall. That's 9 stories tall. So when we see that, you got to remember, if that was solid gold, there'd be no way that they could put that up there. Now, looking at those numbers, in numerology, 6 is the number of man, because man is just incomplete. But 1 is the number of completeness, of singularity, oneness in God. So if you take man and put God to him, what you have is 7. That's how you have the number of completeness. 7 in numerology is not the perfect number. It is the number of completeness. And if you took 1 away, if you took God out of man, then man's incomplete without God. See how numerology actually works from the Bible. Now, when we look at this, there's a specific verse that kind of pops up to me. And it's Revelation 13:14. And it says, "And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast." Are you thinking image? That the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the beast to be killed. That's interesting correlation here. And then in 18, Revelation 13:18, here is wisdom. "Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it's the number of a man, and his number is 666. So numerology starts to come together, and you can see how this lines up. And you might even notice that there's some similarities between these two things here. I want you to start thinking about how that might be something, a message God might be sending to us. All right, so the location of this thing was in Dura. And there's other cities named Dura, but this one's very specific because it's 6 miles southeast of Babylon. It's enclosed by a wall, and it has a very large furnace in it. You can see on the map where I've kind of showed you where Babylon is located, and then not too far away from that is where Dura is. I use these maps like this to kind of get you to locate in modern times. That's a modern map you're looking at. And in modern times, where does this thing look? Where does it fit? How close is it? Where's it at? I mean, almost take a look and see that it's on the same kind of parallel that Jerusalem's on. If you look at it, very close. So, take a look at the map. All right. Now, let's go to verse 2. "And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of this image, which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up." Babylon was a very large empire. I mean, remember the maps that we talked about before? It was huge. It was huge. It spanned nations. So there's no way that all of those people would have been in attendance at this thing. So what he did was he brought these representatives of those provinces to swear allegiance. It would be as if it was California, and Kentucky, and Alabama, and Arizona, and everything. And they have the governors come. So it gives you kind of an idea. The king's pride and fear here is really causing him to start trying to unify this kingdom, but he's using religion and fear. Worship or die. And this is a tactic that is used by very few ungodly men and groups. over history, but start thinking about that and thinking, I wonder who else has done this over history. If you notice here, there was many different officers that was named here in 2 and 3. And this complete list kind of puts it together. And they're ranking, in different areas of what they're in charge of and everything. All the people wouldn't fit. So bringing these guys together here was going to be his solution for being able to get all the legions from the entire place underneath one area. If you think about it, that also means that requiring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be there, it would have been that they were representing who? That's right. The Jewish people would have been represented by them. So they would be swearing allegiance for all of those people as well. All right, let's go to Daniel 3. So, verse 3 says, so the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried aloud, to you it is commanded, all peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the harp, and the psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. The most visible references to this government-sponsored religion under the penalty of death is what? This one, Babylon. The Islamic Sharia is something that is starting to just take over certain areas all around the globe. Yet it's following the same thing. Worship Allah or get your head chopped off. And it's strange how you're seeing certain patterns of things linking together, revelation-wise, you're seeing them. And then, of course, speaking of Revelation, the Antichrist and the tribulation period. This is more than just a political gathering. See, this is a church service he was putting together, complete with music, right? It had all of that music that was there, and it was called a total commitment on the part of the worshipers. Worship was, if you notice, was used 11 times in this chapter. That's a lot for worship. I mean, you think it would be a psalm or something. The music, very powerful. Lucifer was given over to have that gift when God made him. In Ezekiel 28, it says that even the pieces of instruments were built into you. The timbrels, the pipes, all that stuff was built into him. He didn't play music, he was music. He didn't make the sound of music like a speaker, he was music. He didn't have an instrument, he was music. He didn't sing the words, he was music. So you see how this is something that gets twisted today. And if he twists that gift, you notice that music is a very powerful thing that stirs us. Emotionally, it really digs in and grabs us, and it makes us vulnerable. Throughout history, music and song have played an important role in strengthening nationalism, motivating conquest, and inspiring people to act. Think about our national anthem. Think about music themes for movies. Some of these movies, if you remove the music, the movie would be worthless, not even worth watching. So, when you see this, it makes you start to think of how powerful that might have been. The English poet William Congreve wrote that music has charms to soothe a savage beast, but music also has the power to release the savage in the beast. Remember, David played the harp and it calmed King Saul down. So, music, very, very powerful tool, very powerful tool. I heavily lean against using music to sway people emotionally, these altar calls that you hear. I love the fact that people are giving their lives to Christ. But when they're standing up and being drawn because they're singing a fantastic hymn, I exalt thee, or I have decided to follow Jesus. I love these songs. But to play it in such a way that it's the thing that motivated them to come forward because the song in its own self did it, instead of the Holy Spirit, they were honoring that. I'm not in agreement with that. So, once these people are here and we're singing a song and we're all happy, that's great, but that choice has to be made by something that would stick, whether it's in the fire, whether it's in soft music, because when that soft music is gone, do you still have the Holy Spirit walking with you? Was it a true conversion? So that's my 2 cents on the music. Verse 7, so at that time when all of the people heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, in symphony with all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. This superstitious crowd right here, they were so accustomed to worship anything, they'd worship a toaster if it came down to it, because that's what it was. So this was not a big problem for them to be able to do it, especially when you put in there that if you don't do this, we're tossing you in the oven over here with the rest of the chocolate chip cookies. So this was not going to be a big deal for these guys. Verse 8, therefore at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, and the psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the gold image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have set up over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods, nor worship the gold image which you've set up. Sounds like somebody's getting set up here a little bit, right? Didn't say anything until here we are, and then they go to spring the trap on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar in rage and fury gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. See, when you have a situation like this, it starts to separate the true believers and other. So when you see there's a difference between these true believers and the unbeliever, it's not the presence of faith, because everybody has faith in something. The difference is in the object of that faith. The crowd believed the herald and the king, so they worshipped. The 3 Hebrew men believed the commandments of God, so they disobeyed. The crowd had faith, eager to believe anything. The Jews had confident faith. They knew what they believed. They knew the Scripture. They believed the Scripture from their heart. Like 2 and 2 equals 4. Like the sun's going to come up tomorrow. That word is what we stand on. Where these guys that were there, they believed in anything. Oh, sure, worship this, worship that, worship the tree. These guys said no. The Almighty said no. See, the believer here lives by faith in the living God and what He has revealed in His Word. See, I've come to see that God, no matter where we're at, I don't understand the Bible. I don't get this. I don't understand that. I don't grab this piece. I don't understand what you're saying. But God will take it as you read. And if you're reading in faith and you're saying, Father, show me what it says. Show me what your word's talking about. And when you do, He'll show you just the tiniest little mustard seed of something. And you'll get it. And it'll become clear. And that epiphany that you got on that subject right there will be the thing that's the catalyst that moves you on to another subject. And your faith grows, which means that's what that verse is talking about. That faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word. It's not man, it's God's Word. And as you listen, you say, God, you show me something. You teach me, Father. Not man, not something else that's going on. And you're willing to say, yeah, I want to know that. So, when everyone bowed down there, and these 3 men are still standing there, they had to have been standing there on the Word. They had to have been standing there on something that would have been more like Isaiah 43, 1 and 2. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by your name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they shall not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, nor shall the flame scorch you. I mean, that's something they're going, that's exactly what's happening right now. And they stood on it because that's what they knew was going to get them through it. Now, those men knew that the God kind of faith means obeying God, regardless of the feelings within us. the circumstances around us or the consequences that are before us. True faith isn't frightened by threats. It's not impressed by crowds or swayed by superstitious ceremonies. True faith obeys the Lord and trusts Him to work out the consequences. And that's what these Jewish men knew. They knew the law of God. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them. So the question is, what kind of faith do you have? It is important to remember the godly names of these men as well as the names they were being forced to fit into. Remember, bowing down before an image expressly was prohibited in the Torah. That's Exodus 20, verses 4 and 5. Now remember those new names that were given. Remember, Daniel's original name was God is my judge. That's who Daniel was. Hananiah was beloved of the Lord. Mishael was who is as God. Azariah was the Lord is my help. These were the men that had to be put in a position to choose. And those names were aptly put to them when they were named as children, as they grew up into men. So let's go to 14. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I've set up? Now, if you're ready, at the time that you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, and the psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you will fall down and worship the image which I have made. Good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Doesn't that seem strange? Because it seems the opposite of what he was saying in the last chapter. Boy, your God's awesome. Well, what God is going to take you from? Well, you know, he got himself in that 20 years, he put himself above God. Little Antichrist foretelling there. Now, doesn't this look like it's got a second chance? Because he said if anybody doesn't do that, they're getting thrown in. They didn't do it. They didn't get thrown in. So what is his second chance? Is a second chance something where it's God showing them like they had favor with him? Or is it something where God might be drawing attention to the situation so he can say, let me show you what I'm going to do, and made the situation occur? So you've got to kind of go, all right, when these situations occur, it has to be for God's glory. Whatever situation you are in, when you stand in faith and you come out of it on the other side without even smelling like smoke, you're going to be able to say, only God could do this. Only a God like you. So sometimes the circumstances are there because it's drawing attention. Remember Lazarus. He said, this has not happened but for the glory of God. And he could have went straight back to Bethany, but he didn't. He had a little detour right there. So had that detour not been done, he might have gotten there before. That wasn't his point. Glorifying Father was. That's what ours needs to be. Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that it is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And if he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you set up. These guys are saying, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. We don't have to defend ourselves in this, because God is going to defend himself, and he's going to defend us in this. So these guys were saying, O Nebuchadnezzar, up yours, O king. They're just not doing it. They're not the one that's going to bow to that pressure. We've got to remember that these times of adversity are usually the times of opportunity, especially when God's people are being persecuted for their faith. You will be brought before rulers and kings for my name's sake, for a testimony to them. The 3 courageous Jews were not even concerned about themselves. They weren't concerned about the fury of that king. Their only concern was obeying the Lord and giving a faithful witness to everyone that was watching and listening. Remember, they were representing all the Jews. So what they were going to do was the way it was going to go. And they were not going to be a bad witness. Their attitude was still respectful. Their words were few and carefully chosen, but they were definite. People are only concerned with physical comfort and survival. Those kind of people, they will do almost anything to escape danger and death, even to the point of selling themselves into slavery to men and the empty myths that these men promote. This is the philosophy of the devil. This is the philosophy that we're seeing permeating not only the world today, but unfortunately the church. Job 2:4 says, skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has he will give for his life. We're signing away our birthright for a bowl of beans. And it's completely disrespectful, not honoring God. Now that's quite the opposite of the outlook of the Christian believer who believes. John 12:24 and 26 says, most assuredly I say to you that unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it produces much grain. He who loves his life will lose it, and he who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. But if anyone serves me, let him follow me. And where I am, there my servant will be also. If anyone serves me, him my Father will honor. That is what the Word of God tells us to live by. We, as believers, we must strive to remain that faithful remnant. Isaiah 1:9, Romans 11:5. Though he slay me, yet I will trust him, but I will maintain mine own ways before him. I'm going to keep myself together. I'm going to keep myself moving towards Father. Job 13:15. It even says in Hebrews 12:29, our God is a consuming fire. Interesting analogy, seeing how they're getting ready to go into this fiery furnace, right? So in 19, the Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face was changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated, 7. And he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats and their trousers and their turbans and their other garments, and they were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of that fiery furnace. So you got to notice a couple of things here. That furnace was heated 7 times, and it was hot enough to kill the men that were being put in. And who did he use to throw them in? Certain mighty men. These were the cream of his crop. These weren't just, average guys there. So, in 24, then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men into the midst of that fire? And they answered and said to the king, true, O king. Look, he answered, I see 4 men, loose and walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. They are in the form of the 4th. And they are in the form of the 4th is the Son of God. Then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and he spoke, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God. He's starting to acknowledge it again, isn't he? Come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire. See, there are stories that people try to explain away these kinds of things. And there was even a show on a CBS show years ago, and they had the top guy from Owens Corning, the cooking people, and he was describing, well, it would have had to been, and it would have had to have been this big, and he said, well, there's a possibility that there was a cold spot. There was cold spots inside there. But yet we go back and we think to ourselves, hang on a second. Those 7 guys died when they threw them in. If it was so hot in there that just the heat coming out killed them, then there's no cold spots that would have did that. So, as we're doing this, and we're seeing these comments, see how he starts shifting. He's starting to acknowledge this. This is going to be really important in chapter 4 next week. So you see how he starts shifting and going, wait a minute, Son of the Most High God. So in 27, and the satraps, the administrators, the governors, and the kings, and the counselors, they gathered together, and they saw these men on whose body the fire had no power. The hair on their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them. Sounds like a prophecy fulfillment from Isaiah, doesn't it? Many of God's servants never know the fullness of spiritual liberty until they're cast into the midst of the furnace. If you have to go into the furnace, have the faith to know that Christ is in the furnace with you. Hebrews even told us that he's been tested in all points. There's not one thing that we're going through that he has not gone through, and he's not with us. He said, I'll never leave you, I'll never forsake you. So in verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies, and they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut into pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. See, the king's got a real short memory, don't he? Because he said the same thing back over here with Daniel. And then he goes, and now he's getting talked to. So it seems like God keeps sending this guy some messages on and off and on and off. And when we see next week, you're going to see how much he really did receive what God was sending. In verse 30 it says, Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. See, when there is a test inside our lives, we've got to understand that inside the promotion. See, the test is there, but there's always a promotion on the backside, because the test that is given is something to assist, to help. The testing of your faith produces patience. The patience is the promotion. There's always a benefit. There's always something that's going on. So when you look at this, that's why you can count it all joy, because if there's something that is coming through the trial, then the test is going to produce something of benefit to you. So when you see the trial coming, you skip the things that are going on and you say, there's a benefit coming for me. I'm going to grow. I'm going to benefit from this. Your attitude, your perspective that you have, is it from this level here, oh, woe is me? Or are you seeing yourself in the oneness of God? Are you seeing yourself as a child of God? Are you saying, I'm a son, and this is to benefit me and to keep me going? So it's awesome how we can get a hold of this and really take this message and make it one with us. So let's see how we can apply that today. Now, it's often significant to notice what is missing in the Scripture. Almost it's not what's there, it's what's missing from the Scripture. And the Holy Spirit kind of erases some things here and there so that we can see if we're picking it up. Study to show yourself approved, a workman that needs not to be ashamed, right? So, how are you studying this? And when you're looking at this, there's a specific verse that's very important to us. Hosea 12:10 says, I have also spoken by the prophets, and I have multiplied visions and used similitudes by the ministry of the prophets. God speaks to us using many different things. Figures of speech, examples, allegory, all kinds of things. So when you think of that, think about the story we just went through. Who's missing? Whose book? Daniel. So Daniel's missing from the story. Don't you think that if everybody was supposed to be gathered, he would have been there? Yet in this story, he's not there, is he? Doesn't say where he is. But in that same thing, now you can start looking at this and you can say, so the Holy Spirit speaks to us in all different kind of ways. One of those ways is models and types. So you look at this thing in this model and type, and you can start saying to yourself, okay, so what is the type? What are we talking about here? Okay? Before we do that, let me give you a classic one that is great as an example of this. Typology. That's what we call this, a study of types and different things in the Bible and how they predict. See, the Greek model is like Nostradamus. You know, I can tell you what kind of card you have in your hand. The Hebrew model is pattern and fulfillment. So as something happens, it fulfills itself and it shows you things that are going on. So, and Jesus spoke all about that. But here's a type that we can use. It's Genesis in 22, and it's Isaac. They call it the Akedah. It is the sacrificing of his son with Abraham and Isaac. In this typology, you're going to see that Abraham's the father, Isaac is the son, the offering, the only son who's dead to Abraham. And then you see that there's one more, Eliezer. We don't know his name's Eliezer right off, but it's the servant to Abraham. And he was sent to go get a wife for his son Isaac. Now there's way more connections in this one that we could show you what they are. There's hundreds. There's actually been books written on this. There's so many of them. But as you go through this type, this from Genesis 22, it's teaching us a specific truth. So Genesis 22, if you start off in verse 1, now it came to pass that after these things that God tested Abraham, and he said to him, Abraham, he said, here I am. He said, take now your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. Your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love. That sounds like John 3:16, doesn't it? And then he says, go to the land of Moriah. That's Jerusalem, Israel. To one of the mountains. Doesn't say which one, but he says, I'll tell you when you get there. Golgotha was the skull, the place of the skull. It was a mountain. It was a hill that was near the Temple Mount. So in verse 3, it says, so Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and he split the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. He took 2 of his young men with him. How many angels were at the tomb when Jesus rose? Mary went down some. How many people were standing there as Jesus rose up into heaven and they watched? So, verse 4, then on the 3rd day Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place afar off. 3 days. When Abraham was told, go sacrifice your son, he was dead to him. He knew this is what's going to happen. So how long was he dead to him? 3 days. How long was Jesus in the tomb? 3 days. Verse 5, and Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go up yonder and worship, and we will come back to you. So Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and the 2 of them went together. Who carried the wood? Isaac. God carried the fire and the knife. Jesus carried the cross of wood. Isaac was not a child, probably 30 years old. You're going to see that as we go through kind of things, but you're going to see that he was not a young boy. He was voluntarily going. Jesus voluntarily went. Both of them went together in agreement. Jesus was absolutely in agreement with the Father, who said, not my will, but yours be done. But Isaac spoke to Abraham and his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. And then he said, look, and the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, my son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering. And the 2 went together. He said, my son, God will provide himself. You understand what that says? He's not going to go get a lamb. He said he will provide himself the sacrifice. God died for us. He didn't get a sacrifice. He died for us. See the connection? In 9, and they came to the place of which God had told them, and Abraham built an altar there and placed the wood in order. And he bound Isaac his son, laid him on the altar on the wood, and Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. So he said, here am I. And he said, do not lay your hand on the lad, nor do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. So we see this, angel of the Lord. Jesus was obedient to exchange places. Isaac, he was about 32 years old, 33 years old. This is the same age as what Jesus was. He spared not his only son, but delivered him up for us. How shall he not be with him also freely give us all things? Romans 8:32. So Abraham did not withhold his son, and this is where we see the connection. And there's so many more connections to that story and what might have happened. And you can see that it's a type. You can see how all of this is a type of the cross, of something for us.